For years, there was a certain snark and pretension that only belonged to book readers. Those who were ecstatic to inform you how underdeveloped a movie character was, or how the novel really dives deep into the main character's psyche. But now, finally, video game players can jump in and say, the video game was better. Hey everyone, I'm Joe from Create Context, and today we're talking about Return to Silent Hill, directed by Christoph Gans. This isn't Christoph's first rodeo with the Silent Hill series. He directed the first film in the series, the film simply titled Silent Hill, in 2006. 2006's Silent Hill was a pretty successful video game adaptation. This film, while not a masterpiece, made some wise choices when it came to adapting its source material. Video games and movies are two wildly different mediums, so it's difficult to compare the two, but nonetheless, studios have been trying to leverage successful video game franchises into film franchises for decades with middling success. There have been a few outliers and a few games that translate very well onto the screen, but more often than not, film adaptations miss the core of what makes a video game successful. Video games are not predicated on their story. Some, even most now, have stories with tons of talented writers doing a lot of hard work, but the main core of a video game is, and always has been, its gameplay loop. The thing players are going to be doing over the course of 10 to 20 hours. It has to be fun, engaging, and it has to continually get more challenging. By contrast, a film is about its arc. Mainly the arc of the protagonist. The protagonist needs to start and end their story at different places. They need to have grown throughout the experience of the film and become a different person, either better or worse, depending on their experiences and their reactions to those experiences. Games are all about loops and films are all about arcs. So how do you translate that loop into a successful arc? Well, the first Silent Hill film did a pretty good job of this. In the Silent Hill video game released in 1999, the gameplay loop is pretty simple. You enter one area of the town, maybe a school or a church, you fight some enemies, you solve an elaborate set of puzzles, and that allows you to leave that section of the town and go on to the next where you will do the same thing. Each area you enter has more difficult monsters and harder to parse puzzles. You do this over the course of 10 hours or so until the game ends with its toughest boss fight and the character reaches his resolution. The Silent Hill film adapted this by writing in a literal loop. In the film, the main protagonist is given a gender swap, a rather inspired idea from Gans and his writer Roger Avery, who is searching for her daughter in the haunted town of Silent Hill. Every 20 minutes or so in the film, a loud siren cries out, and the town turns into this strange nightmare version of the place our protagonist Rose has been traversing. Each time this loop starts, she's met with stranger and scarier enemies, and when the loop ends, that's when we typically get a bit more backstory to her daughter and the town. It's not handled perfectly in the film. There is still an overly long exposition dump at the end, and there's a studio-mandated lead who takes up entirely too much screen time and adds no value to the film. Honestly, this movie, the first film, is over 2 hours long. It should have been an hour and a half, and if they would have just cut that main male protagonist out of it, it would have been a much stronger film. But it was still a very interesting way to translate the loop of a video game into the arc of a film. The first Silent Hill film was based on the original 1990 video game, with a sequel coming in 2012 that was loosely based on the third installment in that game series. But in this video game series, the second game, Silent Hill 2, is by and large considered the best in the series. Some people have their favorites and may prefer the combat or puzzle loop of a different game over the second, but by and large, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone, gamer or not, who would argue that Silent Hill 2 is not the pinnacle of that video game series. So it seems odd that the first and third films got greenlit before the second, but finally, 20 years after the first film and 25 years after that game's release, we finally have an on-screen adaptation of Silent Hill 2, and boy, is it mid. Return to Silent Hill mostly ignores the events of the previous film and instead tells the story of James Sunderland. It's a contained story that follows just him. James, in this film, has lost his girlfriend. She's presumably dead, but the film doesn't explicitly give you any backstory until a late third act reveal. He receives a mysterious letter from Mary, his estranged or late girlfriend, no one really knows, asking him to come back to their special place, a place he immediately recognizes as Silent Hill. Silent Hill 2, the video game, follows a very similar premise, but one that is entirely more compelling given its additional exposition. In the game, Mary is James' late wife. This isn't a reveal or a plot point we're meant to discover, it's laid out right at the beginning. James receives that same mysterious letter asking him to come to Silent Hill, but knowing it must be impossible because his wife, not his girlfriend, has been dead for 3 years. That's a much creepier and more compelling setup than what we're given in this film, and the concessions only continue throughout this hour-and-a-half story. It's obviously very difficult to adapt a 15-hour video game story into an hour-and-a-half film, even if you have the opportunity to remove the bulk of the source material's gameplay loop. But so much has been lost in translation that pretty much everything interesting in that video game has been cut or parsed down to nothing more than a cameo of a character who gets a full and satisfying arc in the video game. In the 40 plus years of what I'd call the modern video game era, an era that kind of started with Nintendo's entertainment system in the 80s, there have been an increasing number of games with a rich enough story that would hold up well to an on-screen adaptation without the necessary gimmick of building in a loop. We saw this done incredibly well with HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us. That game itself played out more like a serialized television show. Of course, there is a gameplay loop in the video game, but that loop is almost secondary to the story the game is telling. That story that was adapted almost too literally when it went to HBO. Silent Hill 2 benefits from being one of those games. The story in that game is the main driving force behind its success. Again, there are puzzles and enemies, but the real driving force behind the game, the thing that kept gamers playing, is uncovering the mysteries of Silent Hill and the characters James meets along the way. While playing the game, its gameplay loop never becomes super addictive the way other games do, but its arc and story are so interesting that players felt compelled to keep searching, to keep going further, so that they could see that cutscene and learn a bit more about the characters inhabiting this strange, creepy town. In Return to Silent Hill, all of these interesting characters with dark backstories that eventually merge into James stories are all just a big pile of nothing sauce. There is no character development for any secondary character in this movie, and few of them have any sort of resolution in their story other than maybe some vague ties to James that are never explained in a way that's satisfying or, truthfully, that make much sense. It's a huge fumble and one that makes this film feel more disappointing than actually bad. Without knowledge of the source material, Return to Silent Hill is just an okay movie, but having knowledge of the game makes the whole film feel like a shell of a great story that was fumbled at every single plot point. I won't go into major spoilers for either the game or the film, but I will talk a little bit about the themes the game is trying to represent and how they are utterly devoid of analysis in this film. The main game deals heavily with guilt and shame. James' sojourn through Silent Hill is almost akin to Dante's journey through the 9 circles of hell in the Divine Comedy. James is tormented through this journey by memories of his past, victims he's left in his wake, and this unrelenting guilt for actions that are eventually revealed in the game's final moments. Each character, either literal or figurative, are manifestations in some way of his guilt. The film takes all these pieces and whitewashes them in a way that softens every decision that led James to Silent Hill. All the way back to the film's first concession of turning Mary from James's wife to his girlfriend, these are all concessions that soften or outright abandon every poor choice that would lead someone to a terrible place like Silent Hill. There are some merits to this latest Silent Hill film. It looks pretty good visually. Gans has done a fine job translating the aesthetics of the video game for the screen. Some of the monsters are quite terrifying when they're on the big screen, and there are plenty of jump scares to keep audiences on edge throughout the film. But the film's major concession, the abandonment of the game's true themes, its lack of consequences for the guilt-ridden protagonist, and the finale of this film that ends on a note so utterly bonkers, is one that absolutely recontextualizes everything that made Silent Hill 2 interesting, and not in a good way. Maybe if by some miracle Roger Avery would have returned to help write the script, then the film wouldn't have abandoned all the dark themes and ideas of the game. Avery is no stranger to controversy, and he's helmed, in my opinion, the most accurate adaptation of Bret Easton Ellis's work with his film Rules of Attraction, but it's futile to speculate. As it stands, Return to Silent Hill is an unsuccessful film that loses and abandons everything that made the game a masterpiece. If you have the option and the time, I would recommend just playing the video game. A fantastic remake of Silent Hill 2 released a couple years ago, and it's currently the best way to experience the story of Silent Hill 2 while watching Return to Silent Hill is by far the worst. Thank you guys so much for hanging out at the Weekly Movie Minute. Again, I am Joe from Create Context. If you like this and could subscribe, that would be super cool. And I'll see you guys next time.